So first of all, I hope you've all had a really great Christmas break, that you've come back all refreshed for an exciting program of campaigning in 2017. For those of you who joined us in December, you'll have seen and heard that we have another packed campaigning year with plenty of opportunities to influence global processes that will have a big impact on the lives of people living in poverty. As you've heard, we'll be particularly focusing on a couple of big systemic issues that prevent people accessing their right to healthcare, namely the increasing risk of antimicrobial resistance and the issue of donors withdrawing support from countries before they're ready. 2017 is also a big year for education, which we're going to be hearing more about in a few months. But this month, as you'll hear shortly, we'll have an opportunity to influence the UK government's ambition to eradicate polio, something that many of you have worked on before. Before we get into that, I'd like to share a reflection from my very first day in the office after the break on the 3rd of January. As happened on several occasions last year, we all came into work to the sight of negative headlines in a number of the tabloid media about so-called wasted aid. These attacks were sustained all week, and it looks as though aid skeptics are going all out to discredit the great work that UK achieves day in and day out around the world, obviously thinking that with the current government in place, there's a chance that their arguments that we shouldn't be spending UK taxpayers' money on the poorest and most marginalised are likely to get a more sympathetic hearing. Let's be clear. There are a small number of diehards who won't be persuaded by any amount of information about aid effectiveness. And while these are politically motivated attacks, some of these people genuinely believe that it's wrong to spend our money in this way. However, these people are, unfortunately, disproportionately influential. And as you know, millions of people who have far less knowledge about what UK aid achieves than you do actually believe the stories about alleged waste and corruption. For example, last week's images in the Daily Mail and the Sun were accused of people receiving cash in Pakistan. This aid program was lambasted as a waste of taxpayers' money. However, what people were not told is that these conditional cash transfers have a load of evidence behind them that shows that the most experienced and respected aid agencies agree that this is the most efficient way to deliver life-saving emergency aid in some situations. Rather than directly handing out food, there's just such a strong evidence base to back this stuff up. But of course, the story was intended to play to the fears about terrorism, immigration, benefit scrounging, and so on, basically dehumanizing the people who are most vulnerable, who it is the aim of overseas aid to help. We need to continue to show that these negative portrayals of aid are misguided and wrong, but let's not forget that many of the members of the public who don't support aid are often supportive of many other good causes. So we need to take care not to demonize them, much though it pains us to have our values challenged so fiercely just from the shelves of our local news agents. We have to try to empathize with our more skeptical neighbors and reflect on how we express the truths we know in a way that will open up a dialogue, so that we get the chance to find the right ways of explaining the value of aid, particularly to those whose minds are open to at least hearing the evidence. A little empathy here goes a long way, and understanding people's very real concerns and speaking to those can make a huge difference. What increased empathy lets us do is make a stronger appeal to the common humanity in all of us. It also lets us recognize the very real concerns that those opposed to aid have, while not stopping us from challenging those concerns that just aren't supported by evidence. Empathy really matters because at the end of the day, I wholeheartedly believe that no one wants children to die from easily preventable diseases any more than they want someone's grand to experience horrible conditions in a care home or to be left to fend for themselves after a flood hits their town. So I'm with David Cameron on this. When he was asked, shouldn't we fix things at home before we send so much money abroad? He replied, Britain is a rich and prosperous country. We do not have to choose. We can do both. More evidence and more empathy will go a long way to ensuring that we can do that. Some of these words were from my most recent blog on this subject, which you can find on our website, www.results.org.uk/blog, under the title Evidence and Empathy. If you don't feel you know enough, you don't have enough evidence, don't worry. Relatively speaking, you absolutely do know a lot. And do please use us and other reputable international development organizations as sources of reliable information. Lots of counter-arguments about the value of aid are being collected on the website of BOND, the umbrella organization for UK development agencies, and you can see lots of inspiring stories about the difference that well-spent aid makes, as well as information on the reality of things like cash transfers. So head over to bond.org.uk, and there are lots of resources there that you can use to inform your discussions with friends and relatives who maybe see the world a little differently than you do. Now, over to Amira, who will give us a summary of the work you've been telling us about this last month. And as always, please chip in if you've got other things to add.
Thanks, Aaron. I'd just like to say a welcome to any new people and any of our community organisers who have recently joined the new network. We hope to have more individuals join onto the call next month, following the first ever community organiser online training. So in terms of updates from the network, we thought December would be a quieter month for our groups, getting ready to wind down for Christmas. But we've had quite a few surprises. The Stork Valley group took over a busy Harlow car park for a community fundraiser, raising £376 for results. Thank you. The group also took this as an opportunity to talk to the local community about the importance of universal health coverage. Following this, Jill's article on Health for All was published in the Independent Catholic News Online, using a powerful story of dengue fever in Sri Lanka to demonstrate why everyone should be able to access quality health services without financial hardship. Our new Kent University group met Julian Brazier, the local MP in Canterbury, who expressed his support for aid, with talks of a potential roundtable with other international development groups organising in the area. Paul, would you like to share any tips about meeting your MP face-to-face in preparation for this month's action? Have we got Paul? Yeah. Okay, so we can't identify you at the moment. I just want to end on a recap on some of the highlights of 2016 from Without Our Network. So I'm sure a lot of you have seen our timeline, which was produced, and this can be found on the publication section of our website, and really gives you a great snapshot of the variety of great actions groups across the country took in 2016. We're really looking forward to all that's to come this year too.
Back to you, Aaron.
Right, sorry everybody, just dealing with the mute button. Yeah, that's new technology, hey? Right, so thanks, Amira. Is there anybody else that has a success to share? That's okay, you're probably on mute too, so I tell you what, let's just press on. Thanks everybody. It's now my pleasure to introduce the topic of tonight's call, which, as I mentioned earlier, is polio eradication. Now, if you've read this month's action materials, you'll see that we have a particular opportunity right now to influence the UK government to make a more rather than less ambitious pledge to support the Global Polio Eradication Initiative, the GPEI, which is very likely to be replenished this year. And there are meetings happening soon, which we want to be influencing through our parliamentary champions. So if you possibly can, please do take this month's action, which is to visit your MP and tell them why this is important, and to ask the government to pledge its share, which we think is £100 million. So to hear more of the detail behind this campaign action, it's my pleasure to introduce Rod Curtis, who's the External Communications Specialist on Polio at UNICEF in New York. Rod is a real expert on polio, with first-hand experience working on polio campaigns with UNICEF in India, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. Please join me in welcoming Rod to the call.
Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Everyone's on mute.
I can hear you fine, Rod, and I think everyone else is on mute. So I'm going to take that as a yes. You should all be able to see Rod if you've joined via the web app. His lovely smiling face. So firstly, Rod, you should be aware that you're speaking to Results Grassroots campaigners. They're a particularly dedicated band of people. Some very, very knowledgeable. They've been doing campaigning on international development for literally decades. Some a little less so. This could be their very, very first call. But everybody on this call is united by the fact that we believe that we can individually all do something that's going to make a difference. And our network is prepared to go far beyond taking basic email actions, petitions, clicking on things. And many of them undertake very specific and detailed advocacy with people like parliamentarians, civil servants, and even policy specialists. So we've got some pre-prepared questions for you, and then we're going to open it up to the floor. For those of you...
Come on the computer.
Right, so for those of you on your computers, you can let us know that you want to ask a question using the chat function, or you can just even type the question straight in there, which is probably quite easy. For those of you, it should be on the left-hand side of the screen. If that's causing you any grief, as again, it's the first time we're doing this, anybody on the phone, we're going to do a shout out, so you'll be able to do it as per normal just by yelling. But also, you can also text your questions in. The number, grab your pens for texting in, I'll put in the chat box too, is 0777 56 11178. That's 0777 56 11178. So without further ado, we're going to go straight over to the first of our questions from Edinburgh. Hopefully.
Can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
We can.
Right. Can you tell us a bit more about your work with UNICEF on polio eradication over the years, and what was your role and what kind of activities were you involved with day to day?
Yeah, sure. First of all, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today. I'd like to thank Jim Calverley for his leadership with Results and the Polio Eradication Initiative, as well as to Tom and Aaron for their support today. My name is Rod Curtis. I'm the External Relations Specialist for polio eradication here at UNICEF in New York. I've been working with UNICEF in polio now for 7 years, and before that was with the World Health Organization in Geneva. I'm doing a similar external relations role. With UNICEF, I started off working in India for 3 years. That was in India that obviously still had polio, and we stopped transmission during the period we were there. In fact, this Friday will be the 6th anniversary of the last case in India, which is very exciting. I was there in a role as the communications coordinator, and then followed that up with 3 years as the regional polio advisor based out of Kathmandu in Nepal, working in our regional office, which of course covered the polio endemic countries of Afghanistan and Pakistan, as well as maintaining an eye on India and trying to maintain immunity in the other surrounding countries, such as Nepal and Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and so forth. Just moved to New York in July of 2016, and look forward to being based here for the next few years, hopefully when we can see the end of polio, which will be something that we'll discuss in more detail in the coming minutes. So in terms of my role, it's important to understand that polio eradication is it's a global partnership which was established in 1988 at the World Health Assembly, largely through the advocacy of Rotary International, which first took the idea of eradicating polio after the success of eradicating smallpox in 1977, and really ran with it. The Polio Eradication Initiative is made up of 5 spearheading partners: World Health Organization, UNICEF, Rotary International, the US Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and in the last decade or so, the very, very strong support of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. All of the partners play different roles. WHO obviously is the technical lead in terms of the implementation of the vaccination campaigns, as well as running a laboratory network that seeks out the disease and tests it where we find it. UNICEF is responsible for the supply and demand side. For supply, that means that we are responsible for procuring the vaccines. We do that through our procurement unit in Copenhagen, and deliver the vaccines into the countries and then manage the vaccines in terms of ensuring that the cold chain is secure. We always need to deliver the vaccine at cooler than 8 degrees. So maintaining that cold chain, and then the demand side, which really means creating an enabling environment to ensure that that parents and caregivers are accepting of the vaccine when it is presented to them at the doorstep. I'm a journalist by trade, and worked on newspapers for 20 years before moving into polio eradication. I was most recently a sports reporter, so it was quite a leap into the world of public health. But that is a role that has proven useful because in country we're responsible for managing the media, as well as creating a ground level support for the vaccine through community engagement strategies, working with local traditional leaders, village elders, religious leaders, mothers groups, and so forth, to really create an enabling environment so that the vaccinator, the all-important vaccinator, is successful in that critical touch point on the doorstep. So in India, my role was far more of a ground level role in terms of actually rolling out the communication strategy in the country. I'll go into more detail about this a little bit later on in the evening. But essentially that meant managing our handling of the media, rolling out our information, education and communication materials, so the posters, the radio advertisements, the television advertisements, and so forth, as well as managing a 7,500 strong social mobilization network, which was a very well respected group of mostly local women working in their communities who would go door to door throughout the month, as well as to accompany vaccinators during vaccination campaigns, to establish relationships with parents and provide them information about polio and the disease and how vaccine can prevent the disease and so forth, and to facilitate the vaccination. In Kathmandu, it was much more of a role coordinating the work between the 3 countries, ensuring that Pakistan, Afghanistan, and India were all aware of the best practices that were occurring in each of the other countries, as well as facilitating that cross-border coordination. And really that means that we have the same types of materials, communication materials on both sides of the border. We're ensuring that we are synchronizing vaccination campaigns so that they happen at the same time in both Pakistan and Afghanistan. So when people are on the move between the 2 countries, we don't miss them. And ensuring that we're really sharing information properly between the 2 countries about where groups are moving to and coming from, so that we can ensure that we very quickly identify children as they come into a country or out of a country, and that we can place them into the microplans where they arrive and ensure that they're covered in vaccination campaigns. So broadly, that's been my role in polio eradication to date, and thanks for the question.
Oh, no. Yeah.
Go ahead, get close to the mic and speak loudly.
Hello, this is Stork Valley, Pete Lima at Stork Valley. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Pete.
Great, okay. Yeah. Hello? Yeah. What was your most... somebody's not muted.
Sorry, we can hear you, Pete. Go ahead.
Okay. What was your most memorable moment while working on the polio campaign in India? And how did it feel when India was declared polio free?
Thanks for the question.
Unmuted.
Without question, the most memorable moment was when we heard about what became the final case in a little girl called Rukhsar Khatun, who lived in Howrah, just outside of Calcutta, in West Bengal. At that stage, we were hoping as a program, talking internally about how we would be really, really glad if we could hold India to under 10 cases for the year. We knew that we were in a good place in terms of the possibility to stop transmission of polio in India. And we'd been focusing very, very heavily on our two most high-risk states, which were very clearly the west of Uttar Pradesh and central Bihar, both states in the north of India. Then we discovered that we had this case in West Bengal, in Howrah, and it was a long, long distance away from really where our program was focused. And we considered this to be a very, very dangerous event because Howrah train station has something like 1.3 million people moving through it every week. And we felt that it was extremely dangerous as a place to have a case because from there it could very, very quickly explode and go throughout the country. So we very quickly mobilized to go down to Calcutta, and really for me, that moment of walking into this tiny village, really miles from nowhere, and certainly hundreds of miles from where we really considered ourselves to be most at risk of polio transmission. And to meet this little girl and her family in her very underdeveloped village without access to any great levels of healthcare or amenities and so forth. And just to see how it was possible for polio to really find that very last child, even a great distance away from where we considered ourselves to be at risk, just to realize how adept the virus was at finding any weakness. And also just to meet with her parents in that instance and to see that polio cases for us are a number. We tackle them year by year. In 2016, officially to date, we've had 35 cases. It's a number. But to see this polio case in the week that it had been discovered with this girl who would be paralyzed for life, and to see the impact that had upon her family and also the impact that it would have upon her life going forward was obviously a very memorable moment. Because we didn't have any infrastructure there, we hadn't seen it as an area of high risk. We really needed to move quickly to develop an infrastructure on the ground. We didn't have a social mobilization network there. We were only conducting 2 to 3 national campaigns in that area per year. So we really needed to scale up. So to be part of that process of really starting off by gathering whatever evidence we could from the ground, working out what tools we had at our disposal, and then putting together a network to ensure that we very quickly got high vaccination coverage. And we conducted 3 campaigns within the first 3 weeks, starting off just around the immediate village and then moving out to the districts and across the state. And we're talking massive numbers. The district of Howrah, India, has some 21 million people. So even though these are small districts, we're really, we're talking massive numbers of children. So we very quickly set up a social mobilization network there using NGOs who were on the ground and ended up with about 1,800 social mobilizers who could go door to door and tackle the resistance that we found in West Bengal. And whereas in Western Uttar Pradesh and Central Bihar, we'd been working for many years, more than a decade, in terms of tackling resistance, and we had really overwhelming support in that area. In West Bengal, because it was a new area for us, we had parents who didn't trust the vaccine. It was the more tightly Muslim area than some areas of, say, Bihar, where there were some concerns about the vaccine that had been spreading for years out of Nigeria. And so we really needed to tackle that. And we expected there to be many more cases. And as the months went by, and it appeared that we'd managed to get childhood immunity in the area up to a sufficient level that the virus didn't spread, just month on month on month, we started to feel like we just might have got there. But really, it wasn't until we got through the traditional high season for polio transmission, which runs from June through until December in India, that we started to be really confident about the fact that we might have stopped transmission. And then if you want to talk really to the end of that, in terms of how it felt, we just wanted to maintain our focus for the first 1, 2, 3 years, just to ensure that there weren't any pockets or areas where transmission may have been continuing and our disease surveillance network potentially wasn't picking it up. So when it came to the regional certification, that the entire region was announced polio free, and there's a lot that needs to take place for that to be announced. You know, every laboratory that has the potential to keep a stool sample that could potentially contain the polio virus needed to be investigated and certified as polio free. And we're talking about thousands of laboratories across India alone. So really 3 years after the final case, the WHO region of the Southeast Asia Regional Office certified that all of Southeast Asia was polio free. And they'd been waiting for India as the last country within that region to stop polio in order to be able to achieve that. So that was a very, very special moment where we were sitting with all of the ministers of health from throughout the Southeast Asia region, who were then all basically certified as polio free. And that really just left the two regions of Africa and the Eastern Mediterranean region, including Afghanistan and Pakistan, as remaining polio endemic. So that was it was a tremendous moment. And really, it was a great feeling of accomplishment for the entire polio partnership and all who supported it. Over to you.
Thank you. Hi, I've got another. Can you hear me on the screen?
Yes, I can.
Oh, great. Hello. My name's Caroline Hurd. I'm ringing from Birmingham, and I have a question for you. From your experience working in Afghanistan and Pakistan, what were the main challenges and obstacles to ensuring every child receives polio vaccine, and how did you overcome them?
Thanks for the question. It's a very good one. It's important to recognize that while Afghanistan and Pakistan were both dealing with largely the same ethnic group, which is the Pashtun ethnic group, that the contexts in Afghanistan and Pakistan, while similar, are also very different. So if you'll allow me, I'd like to address the two countries separately. In Pakistan, the most significant issue we had originally was an issue of inaccessibility. Up until 2 years ago, we had whole areas of North and South Waziristan, which are the provinces adjoining Afghanistan, which were completely inaccessible to polio vaccinators. It had been a decision by the Taliban not to allow it, and as a result, we ended up with an explosive outbreak in that region, with more than 350 children there paralyzed for life. We also had issues with resistance across the country, and really even just a fear of being vaccinated because of potential recriminations. We had a negative media environment, which really implicated, really placed the program under pressure. And we also had insufficient quality, really, of vaccination campaigns. We just weren't reaching enough children to achieve the goal of stopping transmission of polio. These were addressed in multiple ways. In terms of accessibility, obviously there was a large-scale military campaign along the border with Afghanistan, which removed the elements which were opposing the campaign, and that was a really significant development. And as the families fled the fighting that happened in that area, we were able to immunise those children multiple times as they came out of the area. And straight away we saw a massive drop in the number of cases that we were getting in that area as we managed to get vaccine into kids. Secondly, we employed a really thorough communications campaign, which was two-tiered in order to create a strong enabling environment for polio vaccination. It had a very strong community engagement element, which was really sort of the ground-up approach. That's working with families directly, whether it be fathers or mothers, religious leaders, village elders and so forth, to create support, direct support for the polio program. And all of that was supported by this more sort of top-down supportive media environment that included conducting media orientation sessions with reporters prior to every campaign, taking them out on field visits, and a very well-constructed advertising campaign on television and radio, which really focused in on the vaccinator themselves as a respected member of their community who was providing a really invaluable service. In terms of the quality, probably the main change was that we went from having occasional vaccinators who were employed for 5 days per month just when vaccination campaigns were happening, to putting in place full-time female vaccinators from the local area who both conducted a vaccination role during campaigns and then more of a social mobilization role between the campaigns. These were mostly women. They were absolutely sourced from their local area. They had to live within the 200 households that they were vaccinating. They were very well trained with the new training package. They were paid on time in order to be motivated for the work, and they were well supervised and monitored. And this really helped to, in our highest risk areas, our tier 1 areas, to really raise the quality of the campaigns significantly. We backed that up with a very strong monitoring system, which meant that every single one of these women were working from a field book which contained the names and ages of every child under 5 living in her area, so that they could walk into a house and actually ask for children by name. It contained their vaccination status, and we had a monitoring system that ensured that everyone had at least 3 people come and check whether or not areas had been vaccinated within a district on a particular day. So this is done through what we call lot quality assurance sampling, as well as household cluster surveys, where a supervisor would go to a house and then to every 8th house on the right-hand side to ensure that a child was finger marked, which was the telltale sign that a vaccinator had come along and vaccinated them in that polio campaign. And what we've seen over the last 12 to 18 months is a drastic reduction in polio transmission in these tier 1 areas as childhood immunity has really been raised. The communication strategy was important because it focused on that critical touch point where the vaccinator is on the doorstep. So everything we did focused on ensuring an enabling environment before the knock, and then making sure they were equipped, trained well with the right tools to facilitate the vaccination at the knock, and then went through a process for the 3 weeks afterwards to go back and speak to the families and ensure that we were maintaining that enabling environment before the next campaign, given that we were conducting campaigns in those areas every month. And so it would become very easy for parents to start resisting the vaccine just because they were tired of vaccinators turning up every month and also demanding other services beyond polio. And so finally, that was something that we've really started to focus in on, and that's offering more than just polio at the doorstep, so that parents who are demanding routine immunisation and other services are able to be provided those by the polio vaccinators themselves, or at least they can facilitate that level of healthcare. In terms of Afghanistan, once again, inaccessibility really was a key issue, and it remains a key issue, to be honest. We're still talking about more than 180,000 children in each campaign that we're unable to reach, largely in provinces like Kunduz, as well as areas of Kandahar and Helmand. And this is just because of the active fighting that is continuing in what is a very volatile security environment. But it's one that we're tackling by having permanent polio teams stationed at the edges of the areas that we can't get into to ensure that we're getting every child that comes in and or out of those areas and they're vaccinated there, as well as getting mobile teams that can be on buses that are moving in and out of those areas and vaccinating the kids on the buses themselves, as well as other things like health camps that can help to draw parents out of those insecure areas into areas where we can access them and vaccinate them with polio, as well as providing other services. The other big issue that we had in Afghanistan was really a cultural reality of parents not wanting to have their children vaccinated when they were newborns. They're really not brought out into the community for the first 60 days of their lives, as well as children who are sick or sleeping. There's just a sort of a cultural aversion to being vaccinated at those times. So really the key for us is to try to increase the number of female vaccinators that we have. These are obviously women who can get inside the houses, who can vaccinate sleeping children, identify infant children within the houses. And culturally, it's very, very difficult for male vaccinators, obviously, to access inside homes. So we're really focusing on trying to increase the number of female vaccinators in accessible parts of Afghanistan to really ensure that we can tackle those cultural elements of not wanting to vaccinate children when they're newborns, they're sick, or they're sleeping. Thank you.
Okay, hi. Hi, Rod. This is Sanjay from the Results Macclesfield group. Hi. We have another question for you. So, we are told that GPEI polio-funded programs deliver a number of other health interventions. What are these, and how do polio workers help achieve them?
Right, it's a good question, because we really are increasingly focusing on broadening the polio program to support other child health initiatives. As I've said, this really does help us with things like resistance to accepting the polio vaccine. In places like India, we had whole villages who would say, don't come and vaccinate our children again until you provide us with a road. So you then need to facilitate with the government about those sorts of possibilities. So it's a lot of demand-based refusals, they're called. So this is something that we're increasingly focusing on. And we also have an eye to the future, because in a post-polio world, if we do manage to stop transmission this year, and we do have the epidemiological opportunity to stop transmission in 2017, what are those army of workers going to be doing in 2018, 2019, 2020 and beyond? So we're really looking at broadening our platform to be able to offer other child health initiatives. So this is done in a range of ways. In India, the polio program has really moved towards supporting routine immunisation, particularly in those areas where we now have networks, social mobilisation networks and vaccinated networks in Uttar Pradesh, in Bihar and West Bengal. And in the areas where we have these staff members, we have seen the levels of routine immunisation coverage, full routine immunisation coverage, increased by more than 30% over the past 18 months. So these workers are involved in actually facilitating routine immunisation session sites by bringing children who are on the RIDU list to those session sites in order to be vaccinated, as well as supporting that through communication activities and so forth, talking about the benefits of being fully routinely immunised against all 9 vaccine-preventable childhood diseases. In India, we've also tackled 3 other areas which were quite critical for us in terms of stopping polio transmission. So this was something we were doing really since about 2006, which was providing messages on the importance of exclusive breastfeeding until 6 months of age, which really helped to provide a mother's immunity to the child initially, as well as really give them the best nutrition, which helped to reduce case numbers. Messaging around hand washing with soap, in order to break the fecal-oral cycle, which is how polio is transmitted. And then tackling the incidences of diarrhea through both ORS, oral rehydration solutions, to tackle diarrhea incidences itself, and zinc, which can help in the prevention of these incidences occurring. So that's India. If you're looking at Nigeria, the most recent outbreak, which we unfortunately had in July of last year, we've had 4 cases there last year after a period of some 2 years without any cases throughout all of Africa. So that really was that really did upset the program, but the response has been strong, and we haven't had any cases there for a number of months now. And in those areas where we were conducting campaigns, people used the opportunity of the polio campaigns to also conduct severe acute malnutrition screening. So these children in the northeast of Nigeria who were coming out of Boko Haram controlled areas were really suffering from a range of ailments, including really high levels of severe acute malnutrition. So this was a great opportunity to actually screen those children and to refer them on to available facilities if they were indeed severely malnourished. We were also providing vitamin A at those polio session sites and malarial bed nets. So these are just some of the very easy add-ons that you can give when you're conducting a wide-scale polio campaign. If you're looking at places like Pakistan and Afghanistan, in both countries, we've conducted health camps where you have a stationary health camp site where you provide the routine immunization services, as well as some very basic malnutrition screening and provision of things like vitamin A and basic medicines, as well as taking the opportunity to provide children with oral polio vaccine or the injectable inactivated polio vaccine at those sites. And in Afghanistan now, UNICEF has put together a task force of all of our sections, the WASH section, the health section, the nutrition section, so that they can ensure that they're prioritizing their activities in areas at greatest risk for polio. So it's a nice example of how easily we are able to draw together various child health initiatives and to offer them to parents through polio's ability to go into areas where other sections may not necessarily be able to go. And I really think this is a key element of what polio has been able to achieve over the last 20 years or so. And that's to prove that it is possible to reach every last child. The equity of health delivery is something that's become really a buzzword, much more of a focus for the international community. And polio really is at the forefront of that, of going into areas that are in conflict. If you look at the last 5 years, we had an outbreak, for instance, in Syria and Iraq, and we were able to conduct campaigns in those areas and stop transmission. We're currently working in areas like the northeast of Nigeria and the bordering areas of Afghanistan and Pakistan with all of their security constraints and vulnerabilities. But despite that, the virus, the nature of the virus requires us to reach every child in order to provide them with immunity, and only then can we be confident of stopping transmission. So really polio has gathered some lessons for other health initiatives in terms of being able to reach that last child and to provide them with universal health care. And I think that the lessons learned out of the polio program are one area that in future years, when in a post-polio world, that we need to be very, very detailed and disciplined about ensuring that we can apply those lessons learned to other child health initiatives. Thank you.
That's great. Now, we've got only 11 minutes left, and we'd like to have a little bit of time left over for additional questions. But we are going to go over to Manchester for our last question of this bit just now. Manchester.
Hi, Rod. Why is a successful replenishment of the Global Polio Eradication Initiative?
Sorry, Peter, I just lost you at the end there.
successful replenishment of the Global Polio Eradication Initiative so important for the final push to eradicate polio for good?
Oh, thanks for the question. Look, the truth is that the last inch is really the hardest. At this point in the program, we're reaching more children than we've ever reached before. The nature of polio eradication is that you do need to reach all children in all countries in order to be able to eradicate the disease. And really, one case anywhere is a threat to all children everywhere. I mean, every child who's being routinely immunised around the planet is being immunised against polio to ensure immunity in all countries. So really at this point, when we are so close to eradication, as I said, 35 cases of polio last year, it's a tiny, tiny number in very, very small geographical areas of the world. I mean, the virus is very much cornered in these very small geographical areas. So we do have the epidemiological opportunity now, a historical opportunity, to end polio for good and to achieve the eradication of just the second human disease in human history. So after all the work that has been done and being this close, we really do need to seize the opportunity to eradicate polio in this year, in 2017. And we need to ensure that we have all resources at our disposal in order to be able to achieve that. The economics of eradicating polio are sound. You're talking about a savings of some $50 billion over the next 35 years, according to various studies that have been conducted. And really it comes down to the fact that no child anywhere in the planet will need to be vaccinated against polio ever again. I think the cost in the Western world is something like $27 per child, is the current cost to vaccinate a child against polio. So it's not difficult to do the maths about the economic benefits that polio eradication can bring. Not to mention the benefits of not having children paralysed for life and the impact that has upon their communities, as well as really proof positive of the fact that you can reach every child with the most basic of healthcare. So there's many, many reasons that we have to finish the goal of polio eradication. And we really just need to ensure that we do have all of the financial commitments that we require in order to go out and achieve that goal in 2017. So really, I would say that this year is absolutely critical. We need to stop transmission, and then we need to maintain that for several years, ensuring that we don't have any cases anywhere before we can finally announce that polio has been eradicated once and for all. I would say that we need that final really push for funding to ensure that we have a sound foundation to ensure that all those polio assets, all of those people who are trained, who are in place, who know how to reach the last child, can then be utilised for other child health initiatives, whether it be routine immunisation or the provision of water and sanitation, hygiene care, whatever it might be. There's a lot of assets that are in place, and we need to ensure that we don't lose that institutional memory and those trained people who are in place, as well as to gather all of the lessons learned, the comparative advantages that polio has managed to pick up over 20 years of trying to eradicate that disease, and ensure that they can be applied in each country for the betterment of child health everywhere. So really, we're at a stage where the donor community is a little bit tired of polio eradication. We've missed several goals along the way. The initial goal to stop transmission was the year 2000. It's proven to be an extremely difficult task, but one that we've learned a lot of lessons out of. And we really are now right on the doorstep of achieving eradication. And with a little bit of luck and really high quality campaigns in Pakistan, Afghanistan and Nigeria, it is an achievable goal for 2017.
Magnificent, and I think one we're all really excited to be getting behind. We're going to open it up for questions in the last 5 or 6 minutes. We've got one question that's coming on the chat. I haven't had any other via SMS, so I'm going to open it up to people who are going to be yelling out. I'll give you, although everyone's on mute, so I'm not quite sure how that's going to work. Oh, what? You've managed to unmute yourself. Okay, Pete, you go, Pete, and then we'll go to the question from Macclesfield that was typed in. Go ahead.
Okay, first I just want to say I'm totally amazed, and I'm sure everyone else is, at hearing your account of the project. It's just unbelievable what you've achieved. So congratulations so far. My question is, you mentioned earlier that there was a religious objection to immunization in some of the village areas, and I'm wondering what kind of publicity you used to overcome that.
Yeah, thanks, Peter, and really appreciate your sentiments. Yeah, look, there has been some religious objection to polio over the years. We had a situation in northern Nigeria through the early 2000s where a very senior imam placed that the oral polio vaccine was not safe, that it was against Islam, and they stopped us being able to conduct campaigns in those areas for several years. And that was a rumor that then sort of gained momentum and really spread around the Muslim world, and one that we've sort of still been tackling in recent years. A couple of things that, of strategies that we've put in place is that, first of all, we have an international Islamic advisory group that has been set up with really the leaders of the Islamic world, from Jeddah right through to the polio priority countries, the key Islamic sects and so forth. Their leadership has been brought together and engaged to put out fatwas and messages in support of the polio campaigns. In contexts like Pakistan and Afghanistan, we actually have a religious support persons network on the ground, which is engaging imams at very much at the ground level, bringing them in for national meetings, and utilizing them to spread the message from the pulpit, and making mosque announcements prior to campaigns in support of polio campaigns. And we've really seen a significant turnaround as a result of these very high level and very ground level approaches to gaining Islamic support. And in many of these contexts, the imams in the local mosque are really our greatest attribute when it comes to tackling resistance in the communities. And they will actually go house to house with the vaccinators and tackle any resistance that we have for religious reasons.
Great. Thank you for that. So you've touched a little bit, perhaps, on the question that came in from Macclesfield, which was on the chat. It says, what caused the outbreak in Nigeria after so long without a case? Do you want to talk to that a bit more, or should we do a different question?
No, look, it's a good question, and it's an important one. You know, we have a really far-reaching disease surveillance network that really crosses the planet. And certainly in countries that have been endemic like Nigeria, we have quite an intricate disease surveillance network that is in place to pick up any child who's paralysed for any reason, whether it be for polio reasons or otherwise, and we will test those children for polio. We were confident that we had stopped transmission across Nigeria. We were confident that we had very good disease surveillance rates. And we were confident that really Africa was polio-free. When the Nigerian government pushed into these Boko Haram-controlled areas, that was when we discovered that polio had still been transmitting against these among these very, very small communities that we hadn't been able to get into for several years. And it really teaches us that polio is able to survive in probably smaller areas than we thought, and really underlines the fact that we have to be very nimble and strategic about reaching children in every environment, whether that be within areas that are controlled by anti-government elements or not. So that was the reason. In Boko Haram controlled areas where we hadn't been able to vaccinate and hadn't been able to have medical personnel be part of a disease surveillance network, when these areas became accessible to us as a result of military intervention, then we discovered that polio had been circulating in those areas throughout that time. So it's really sharpened our focus, I suppose, on areas like Nigeria and Afghanistan about the need to get into areas that may have previously been inaccessible, on the need to really, really work with community leaders and with all groups, regardless of where they fall, to ensure that we can vaccinate children at every opportunity.
Sorry, just having my own struggles with the technology. So Rod, thanks for that. We're actually at time, but we have one very, very last question, which we're going to squeeze in. If you could give it a very short answer. I've put it in the chat. It came in from Paul Emily SMS that in. Rod, you talked about not having to vaccinate worldwide once the world is polio free. How long will that be after the last case?
It's a good question. The Strategic Advisory Group of Experts, called the SAGE Group, they will be the ones who ultimately make the decision. We will certainly vaccinate with the oral polio vaccine in polio priority countries for more than 4 years after the last case, just to ensure that we don't have pockets of transmission. And then we'll probably be looking at a period of 6 to 7 years after the last case before we start to withdraw the vaccine from the rest of the world. This is a decision that will be made by the SAGE, looking at the epidemiology and where the last case was, when the last case was, where we consider that we may continue to have risks, and also in collaboration with the vaccine manufacturers, who are obviously a very key component to this discussion. But you could expect that within 6 to 7 years following the last case will be a period where we will start to withdraw the vaccines from countries around the world, and certainly within a decade from the last case, no child globally will need to be vaccinated against polio ever again, which in terms of human history is just a blink.
Yeah, it's a very exciting prospect. It's certainly one that gets us all in results very, very, very worked up. We're really pleased we stand on the cusp of all of this. Rod, it's been an absolute pleasure having you speak with us tonight. Thank you for bearing with us the very first time we used our new conference calling facility. It's been great to see your smiling face as you've dealt with what has been a barrage of questions. So just really want to say a huge thank you to you. Thank you for joining us from New York.
Thank you very much, and
Thank
really
you.
appreciate the support of the results group. Not only in the UK, but around the world. It's a fantastic support, and I really think this kind of action-oriented approach to these types of meetings, where really reaching out to the Right Honourable Priti Patel in this way is extremely useful. So we're very grateful indeed for the support. I'm happy to speak, and let me know how I can support you going forward. I've got my Winston Churchill mug here, which says never, never, never give up. So that's where we're at, and thankfully we're in it together.
Yeah, thanks, Rod. That's wonderful. So look, we'll say goodnight to you, and in fact, we'll say goodnight to everybody as we are now 3 minutes over time. Thank you to everybody who's asked questions. Thank you all for giving up your evening to learn even more than you already knew about polio. I think we've seen some really great first-hand stuff from the field. Do get in your meetings with your parliamentarians. Do go take that passion, take this knowledge, and take our briefings along. And let's all aim for a very successful and healthy global polio eradication initiative replenishment so we can beat this disease.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night. Cheers, Aaron.
Would you like
Good night.
Good night. I'm sorry, I didn't want to the conference